Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. I just got completely, totally finished with installing the air locker on my 2003 Suzuki Vitara. Since it's still on the lift, I wanted to do a quick wrap up, show you the physical setup, how I set everything up, where I put everything, the electrical setup, how I wired it all, and the air setup for how I ran the air lines down to the differential. And then finally, since it's still on the lift, I want to show you it locking and unlocking. That way you can understand how air lockers work and what they're doing. So if you didn't watch my prior video, I have a lengthy video about how you install an air locker on a 2003 Suzuki Vitara, because they don't actually make an air locker for a 98 and newer Vitara or Tracker. So I was able to put one on this. It took some modifications to the ring gear. I have an entire video about it. I'll link it somewhere on here, but go back and check that out. Now that it's done and plumbed and working, I wanted to show you guys how it works. This is kind of a outline, not of the vehicle, but starting at the front, going towards the back of the vehicle. This is the battery. I ran a positive and a negative wire to the switches. These are your normal automotive type rocker switches. No, they have lights on them. So these are your typical 5-prong switch. Each one of these comes in. Each switch has two negatives. One is for the switch side, and then the other is for the light. And then with each one, the power point in the middle is the incoming power, so we have a fuse. In my case, on the compressor side, I used 12 gauge wire, and on the solenoid side, I used 14 gauge wire. I have a 20 amp fuse here, comes in power, main power to my switch, and then this is my main switch power, goes straight to the air compressor. I also have a wire jumped over to this other terminal. So this other terminal is the light for this switch. So when the air compressor's on, the light lights up. Actually, both lights light up. I don't have them wired separately. So then I'm also jumping power over to the power input of the compressor solenoid, because I didn't want to run another wire just for that, because this is going to be a pretty low power. So that is powering the solenoid. And then I also have a jumper going over to the light for that switch. So how do you jumper over terminals when there's only like one terminal? Well, you do that with what's called a piggyback connector. So this has your spade type connector, but then it has an extra tang on it where you can hook another spade connector and jump over to the next terminal. They also make these, they're called 3-way adapter, and you put it on the spade connector of the switch, and then it has 2 tabs on it, so you can repeat the connection. And I'll show you. Okay, so here's a piggyback connector in use. You see how there's one on the terminal, and then it's got one sticking off to the side, and it's got another wire hooked onto it. So that is a piggyback connector, and that's how that works. So my positive goes to the air compressor, and my other positive goes to the solenoid. This is air compressor. This is the pressure, high pressure cutoff switch. This is my air tank. This is a regulator valve that I have set at 100 psi just to protect the locker. This is the solenoid that sends air down to the differential that engages the air locker. The whole point of the air locker is whatever axle it's in my case it's the rear axle, it locks these 2 tires together. So like, let's say this one was in sloppy goop and this one was on hard ground. If you had an open differential, just this tire would spin. But if you have a limited slip, then this tire will spin and the differential tries to send some power over here. And that's what traction control tries to do too. But if you have a locker, it just locks these 2 axle shafts together. So these 2 tires will always turn together until they don't, which is why I went down this whole road, because I broke a rear axle shaft and then I couldn't find parts that I cover in my other video. So this is a diagram, schematic, of how I set up the electrical and then the air. And the only thing I didn't cover yet is on the negative side of the air compressor, the high pressure cutoff switch actually grounds the air compressor. So I believe it's a 80 to 120. So at 80 psi, it connects this ground. So these 3 lines stand for like chassis ground. So at 80 psi, it grounds, it turns the air compressor off, and then at 110 or 120, it ungrounds, it breaks this connection, and then the air compressor turns off. So regardless on if I have this switch on or off, even if I have it on, if this already has 100 or more than 80 or 90 psi in it, then this still won't turn on because the circuit's still broken right here. So let's go through the physical setup. So here is the battery, here is the fuse. I bought these really nice, they're called Weather Pack fuses, and they've got these nice rubber seals on them. And then I've got it connected to a wire that goes down. There's a grommet that goes through the firewall right there, and it comes out on the inside behind the glove box by the blower motor. And then I have the negative wire hooked to this common negative point right here. So I just put a ring terminal on it and put it in there. So these Viteras are kind of cool in that they put switch holes for them inside the vehicle. They are supposed to be for these switches, I think, but these switches didn't fit, so I had to take a file and I filed down two sides until they fit. I just filed them a little bit and then stuck them in there until they fit. But basically my wires running across over here and up under here. And then for the air compressor, I've got the solenoid, I've got the wires running in that convoluted tubing down along the center console. I still need to zip tie this, and then it comes up into the center console right here. So these are always hot, and since I have, well, these always have power from the battery, but since I have the air compressor switch line powering the air locker, I did that on purpose, so I can't turn on the air locker unless the air compressor's on. I did that so that if I forget to turn on my air compressor but the air locker's on, it'll shut the air locker off. Because let's say you have a leak in your system, or a slow leak or something, and it gets down to 80, 70, 60 psi, your rear air locker could intermittently disconnect. And if you have that happen in like an off-road situation and it like slides out of locked while you're off-roading, it can damage it because you might, you know, skip the teeth or whatever it may be. So I have it so the air locker can't be engaged unless the air compressor is engaged. So I got the air compressor on. It'll take a second to air out. It was completely empty. If I had an unlimited budget, I would love to go buy a brand new ARB air locker, dual twin compressor, and all the things. I didn't want to drop 500 bucks on it. I had a cheapo tire inflator, legit a Husky tire inflator from Home Depot. They sell them at Walmart, they sell them everywhere, which is actually kind of cool because if this fails and you're out and about, I can cut these two wires and hook them into a new Walmart air compressor and hook the barb fitting. I bought a 1/4-inch barb fitting that fit into, so all the inflators come with like a tire, clips on the Schrader valve. You just cut it off and you have a 1/4-inch barb fitting. I'll put a picture of it here. And you just stick that in the end and put a hose clamp on it. That's it. And so you can buy a $40 air compressor and get the same functionality as you would for a $400 air compressor, especially for something that's as low volume as an air locker. If you got central tire inflation system or something fancy, like, that's a totally different story. But for an air locker, it's very low volume. So this should work out really good. You can pick these up anywhere. You could probably get them at a garage sale for $3. Just trying to keep it cheap here. I'm not racing professionally. This doesn't have to be expensive. The air compressor has two wires coming out of it, and this is our on-off switch. It turns on at 90 psi and off at 115 psi. So it came with a pressure gauge. I've got a pressure gauge on the tank right here. And then this is the regulator. It's just a cheapo air tool regulator that can be had for $5 or $10 that I'm regulating the air before it goes to the solenoid, which this line goes through down to the locker. What have I done here? So this is the line coming off the air compressor, and I have it going into a chuck right here so I can disconnect it. Let's say I had to replace this, or maybe I'm at a gas station, or like emergency situation. I need air so I can air up my locker, but somebody else has air, but my air compressor is not working. I can turn off this valve, unclick this, and then click somebody else's air hose on it, or CO2 tank or whatever, and fill my tank with a foreign air source. This is just me being redundant. It was 2 extra connectors. This is your on-off switch for the compressor, and then this is just so if you disconnect this, it doesn't dump the tank. And then the only other thing on here that I didn't cover was I put an extra air chuck on here. You never know if you're gonna need to like fill a tire or fill somebody else's tank. It's just one of those universal quick couplers. So this is a solenoid. When you give it 12 volt power and ground, it lets air go through. I left a loop in the tubing because you never know when you have a leak and you need to cut it off, or you know it gets cut or something and you need just a little bit extra line. I left the loop in there on purpose. Yeah, so this is my whole setup. This is a half-gallon tank. I believe it was set up for train horns. Super simple setup. The air line comes down here. And then I have it follow this vent tube. So it comes straight down. I have it follow this vent tube, and it goes straight into the differential. All right, so why do we have an air locker? Well, it's to lock the 2 rear tires together. I wanted to visually show you what that looks like. You can see, like, this is when it's not locked, it's a normal open differential. And I have it in gear, so the drive shaft is not spinning. So when this tire moves forward, that tire moves backwards. That's how a typical open differential works. If I had a limited slip, I could still do this, but it would be harder because there's clutch packs in there. But this is how a typical differential works. So now I'm gonna go engage the air locker, and then I shouldn't be able to move these at all. All right, so now that the air locker is engaged, everything's locked up. So I can't do anything at all because it's in gear. If I take it out of gear, now both tires spin in unison. So hopefully this video helps you guys. That goes through the electrical setup, the physical setup where everything's located, the air setup, how I ran the air lines, how I used a tank, which is, I don't know, more rare, I guess, among air locker setups, how I set up the electrical switches, and how it works. Hope this video helped you guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. That way I am motivated to keep making videos. And you go out in the shop, work on something.